Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is here now to talk more. Hi, Minister. Good to have you back in studio. Thank you for making the time.
It's a pleasure, Rashi.
I wanted to start off on the topic of foreign interference. And in particular, I want to ask you very, very pointedly, are there, quote unquote, traitors to this country, as Jagmeet Singh put it, in the Liberal caucus?
Listen, when I hear these loaded words, I feel that it's really hurting our democracy. Because fundamentally, foreign interference is a real thing. It's been happening for years. Now it's more of an issue because also of disinformation, misinformation online. But all democracies in the world are facing this. I'm talking about this with my colleagues of different democracies, particularly amongst the G7, and we are the country that is the most forward-leaning on this issue. We're the only country having a public inquiry on this, and the goal is to shed light on the issue and also to find solution. But the goal is not to not make it a partisan issue.
Is that what you're accusing Jagmeet Singh of doing by using that language?
No, I'm accusing Poilievre of doing that. Because fundamentally, what we need to make sure is that everybody has the same facts. So Poilievre right now, the Conservatives, are not taking the briefing on CSIS, on this Foreign Affairs Committee that lots of people have been talking about, and that's what we're talking for those watching us right now. And he's not taking the briefing. He doesn't want to have access to confidential, secret information, while other parties' members and other, basically other parties have decided to take it. And right now, he's making it a partisan issue and also saying, basically, if foreign interference is happening in his own caucus, he won't do anything about it.
And I think those are very real questions to ask the Conservative leader and ask the Conservatives, and I have been asking the Conservatives, but my question to you was about the content of what Jagmeet Singh said and how it applies to the Liberal caucus in particular. He used the language that there were traitors to this country, and I'm asking you very pointedly, and you didn't provide an answer, whether or not there are any people in the Liberal caucus who are acting on behalf of foreign countries.
Listen, if that was the case, they would be out of the Liberal caucus and they should be out of every single party. And that's why my job as Minister of Foreign Affairs is if I see anything that is linked to foreign diplomats not staying in their lane, not abiding by the Vienna Convention, not basically meddling in our democracy, I set them packing. And that's exactly what I did with Zhao Wei last year, a year ago, when I addressed this issue, and I made sure that he was called persona non grata, and Zhao Wei is the former Toronto consul for China.
I have heard you use that example of the diplomat that you kicked out frequently to show Canadians that your government is taking this very seriously. But the CSIS report really undermines that conclusion by pointing out in great detail the degree to which your department was in receipt of intelligence from CSIS about him for years, including since when you became Foreign Affairs Minister, and did not take any action. So much so until the day that the Globe and Mail reported on Michael Chong being targeted, GAC reached out to CSIS for intelligence, and the intelligence that was provided was, quote unquote, according to CSIS, already released. How can Canadians trust that your government is actually taking this seriously when CSIS clearly points out on multiple occasions, including that occasion, that you did not?
I met CSIS, and I had many conversations with the members of CSIS on this issue. And what to your very question of me being aware, I was made aware at the same time as this became public through the media. And it was back in the spring of 2023. So clearly there was an issue within how the government and the public service was organizing briefings for intelligence. And from the moment I got the information, I acted.
Now, so you never saw anything about him prior to that because your department was clearly in receipt of that intelligence.
But I was clear, and that's my story, and I stick to it. That being said, following that, we took many measures. Because, of course, we need to make sure if there's any meddling within our democracy or any form of covert operations by foreign countries in Canada, we need, and I need to be aware. And of course I'll take action. And I've been acting based on what I thought was the best way to conduct diplomacy and defend the interests of our country.
Do you think, though, genuinely your government has taken this issue as seriously as it should? And I ask again based on the conclusions reached by NSICOP. The Prime Minister, following these allegations that have come out about the possibility of foreign agents, has said, well, it's up to the RCMP. Later, a week later, the Minister of Public Safety said, oh, let's send it to the inquiry. And that's only upon the suggestion of the Bloc. What evidence do Canadians have that your government is taking this seriously, and why wouldn't you?
Well, Canadians have clear evidence, Vashi. First, we came up and decided to do a public inquiry. We're the first country on
You were very much pushed into that after months of saying it wasn't necessary.
So we did it. Second, we decided to make sure that parliamentarians could have access to intelligence, which that was never the case before. And so the public...
But again, you were pushed into that by Michael Chong being targeted and nobody knowing.
We created the NSICOP also committee. Listen, I'm not the public safety minister, but what I can tell you is we've been very forward-leaning. Now, have we done enough? No, clearly. That's why you're asking me questions. That's why people are preoccupied. Will we do more? Of course. And we just presented legislation on this issue. But that being said, we have now a very good judge that is doing tough work. She will come up with a report. She came up with the first report. She's coming up with a second report, and we'll follow her recommendations, period.
I would just say we don't know yet if this portion of it will be included in it, but I do take your point. Just quickly to circle back.
Yeah.
Because you said that if there were any so-called traitors to the country in the Liberal caucus, they would be kicked out. Do I take from that your government views the intelligence that NSICOP reported on as not credible?
So I won't comment on the intelligence of NSICOP. What I can tell you, though, is that two things. First, there's a process which is being dealt with, and that's the public inquiry. The second is we need to make sure that when we come up with accusations in our country, there's a rule of law system. And we come up with not only intel, we come up with evidence.
The Prime Minister didn't have a problem standing up in the House of Commons and accusing India of being behind the murder of a Canadian citizen just based on intelligence.
So, based on that, what we did is that there was police inquiry, people were arrested, and there are other investigations happening. And meanwhile, I'm the Foreign Minister, and as Foreign Minister, what do? I'm there to make sure that I continue to address this issue with India. And I think that diplomacy is important. Diplomacy is about having tough conversations with countries, including, of course, with India at the moment we speak. And we stand by the allegations that were set forward by the Prime Minister.
I know, but the point you're making is you can't just get up and name names, which I understand, right? You can't just throw out accusations based on intelligence that hasn't been prosecuted or investigated. But that is what you did in the House of Commons. And the link has not been established by law enforcement with the government of India yet. They are still investigating that.
Well, first and foremost, I think we wanted to make sure that we were sending a clear message. Second, I dealt with the impacts of diplomacy on dealing with these allegations. And it was important. Why? Because it was about Canadian safety. And I think that we sent a clear message, not only to Canadians, not only also to India, but also to the world. And it was important for the
possible foreign agents that serious too, though?
This was an entire breach of Canada's sovereignty, and this was about allegations of a Canadian being murdered.
These are allegations of parliamentarians working against our national interest.
And these are very, very important, and that's why NSICOP had the mandate to do that, and that's why also there's a public inquiry about it. And so basically, you can see that we're in action mode. Now, is this process perfect? No, it is not. Are we learning through it? Absolutely.
Okay, I just want to move on and ask you about Ukraine. I just have a few minutes left, and I particularly want to ask you about the state of the war and Russia's growing success really in and around Kharkiv. Are you worried that Ukraine could lose this war?
Well, we will be with Ukraine until their victory. That's been our position. And at the same time, I'm very optimistic that because of our own aid, because of the EU $50 billion package, and also the recent American $50 billion package, that now Ukraine has what it needs to make sure to win this war.
Do you think that's enough, though? And I ask with great respect because for example, even the $50 billion, it's the interest on the assets backing that. What Ukraine had hoped for.
No, we're talking about two things. I'm talking about the military aid that was approved by Congress. You're talking about Russian assets.
Well, right now, so there's a new $50 billion aid package announced at the G7.
Yeah.
That is backed by, that's interest, like backed by the interest from Russian
Exactly.
assets. And sorry, that's what I meant. And in that vein, I'm wondering, because what Ukraine had asked for was actually the assets, the value of the assets. Originally, Canada had been a proponent of that, so had the United States.
Yeah.
It's Europe who was hesitant, and essentially a compromise was reached. Does that compromise, though, not send a message to Putin that the West is penetrable?
I think that it's the first time that we go as far on Russian assets. I think that we have to continue to put maximum pressure on President Putin. I think at the same time, when Canadians hear all these dollars that we're spending and that we're investing in Ukrainians' fight for freedom, they may ask why. Why is this important? I think, Vashi, fundamentally, what I think is Putin has no red line. I think that every dollar that is invested in making sure that Ukraine defends itself is a way for Canada to stay safe.
I guess, though, I take your point on how this is like a further step, and it's the first time transferring this amount of money based on those frozen assets. But it isn't the assets, right? It's $300 billion that could have gone there, that Europe essentially refused to go down that path. Isn't there some holes that he can now poke in it, given Europe's hesitancy?
Listen, if Putin is watching the G7, and for sure he is, many things he can learn from it. First, the Americans came up with a 10-year security arrangement for Ukraine. So that's based on Canada's idea of doing long-term security commitments for Ukraine, which we also signed on and we announced. Because even after the war, we need to make sure that Ukraine is able to defend itself, because Russia could go back, rearm, and reinvade. The next step right now is the NATO summit in Washington that is coming in July. We need to make sure that this summit is really a success. We need to make sure that we pledge our support to NATO. It's important for us Canadians. It's important for Americans, and particularly in Congress and in the U.S. It's important for all Europe. It's important for Ukraine, and it's important for NATO itself.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note, Minister. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.